A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for taking time under your Friday schedule to attend the question and answer session. We hope to make it concise and brief, but hopefully, inshallah, all of us will come out with something at the end of the session. The aim is to keep it around 45 minutes to an hour, and we'll start with Sheikh Bachoo talking a little bit about maintaining spirituality with their everyday responsibilities, and then we'll open it to Q&A. We'd like to request that we stick to the topic at hand with the questions so that we can be as productive as possible. If you'd like, you can write the questions down and send them to the front, or just raise your hand and then we can take it from there. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I don't want to prolong the introduction and make it a second lecture after the lecture. I just want us to appreciate that when it comes to spirituality, there is a discussion in theoretical spirituality and there is a discussion in practical spirituality. Over the course of the 3 nights, my focus more so was on theoretical framework for spirituality. Okay? The reason I mention that is because I may have made it sound very difficult or very abstract, and I don't want anyone to think that practical spirituality is very difficult or very abstract. Okay. But at the same time, I do think it's important for us to be skilled, to be tooled with some of these concepts, and to have this framework with us, so that when we face questions about Islamic spirituality, we're able to understand those questions and respond to them. One of the examples that I came across recently, and hence one of the conversations we had tonight, is 2 nights ago somebody had sent me a clip, as a very short clip. And in this clip, there's a mother, and maybe some of you have seen it as well. It's in Hindi. And there's a mother who gives some food to her child and says, "Go and deliver it at the mandir." And there's a priest at the mandir, and you give it to him and give him some money as well. And he says, "What will happen if I do that?" And the mother says, "Well, if he eats the food, then our grandfather who's passed away will also get some food in the hereafter." So he goes and he reaches the mandir, the temple, and it's locked, and there's nobody there. So he starts wandering in the streets, and he asks people if there's another mandir. They tell him, "We don't have another temple, but there is a masjid in the neighborhood." So he goes to the masjid in the neighborhood. And there he meets the scholar, the Molwi. And he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "Well, if you had gone to the mandir, you had a priest over there. I'm like the priest at the mosque." So what do you do at the mosque? "Well, the way you do puja at the mandir, we do ibadat at the masjid." "And who do you worship?" And he says, "Well, the way you worship Bhagwan, we worship Allah," right? So he says, "Then can you do me a favor and can you eat this food for me?" And he says, "Look, this is supposed to happen in the mandir. The priest is supposed to do it. We don't do that stuff over here." He says, "Why not?" He says, "Because this is a masjid, and that's a mandir." He says, "But, who do you worship over here?" And says, "We worship Allah over here." It was the same as worshiping Bhagwan. There's no, it's different. He says, "Well, now the young man is asking the priest, and there's a dialogue that happens. I'm just summarizing it very quickly for you. This young boy who's 12 or 13, he asks the Molvi, And he says, tell me how many gods are there? And the Maulvi says, one. He says, well, then the God whom you worship here and the one you worship at the mandir is the same. And then he says, look, my father, he calls me with one name, and my mother has another name for me, and my teacher has another name for me. And I think as Muslims, we have one name for God, and Hindus have another name for God, and maybe Christians have another name for God. But at the end of the day, it is the same name for one person, different names for one person. Right? Of course, there is some good dialogue that happens there, some good acting that happens over there. And I can see a person, as the person who sent it to me, say at the end of that clip that I've been inspired. I think I have a moment of spiritual enlightenment. I have a moment of epiphany and inspiration. And so my question that I asked at the beginning of the lecture today is every spiritual experience a valid spiritual experience? Just because I feel good about it, or I feel right about it, does it make it right? And if not, then what's the standard by which I judge whether my spiritual experience is a valid one or it's not a valid one? Right? So we have to understand this framework. The spiritual experiences have to be compared to theology. Now, for example, in the case of this particular example, in the people of Quraysh, they believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran says, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُم مَّنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ لَيَقُولُنَّ Allah. If you were to ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they would say, Allah. Right? There was no even difference of opinion amongst the Muslim and the Quraysh, that the Quraysh would call him, for example, Bhagwan, and Muslims would call him Allah. They both believed in Allah. And there was no difference of opinion there. And they both believed that Allah was the creator, and there was no difference of opinion there either. And yet the Quran so strongly criticizes their beliefs, because the difference of opinion was not in the existence of God. The difference of opinion was in what? The attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you believe in one God, or do you believe in multiple gods? That's important to the Quran. The difference was not whether God is the creator or not. In the Quran, once you become intimate with it, you find the actual conversation is not about creation. The actual conversation is about rububiyyah, nurturing and lordship. Where Muslims believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Rabb. He nurtures everything to its perfection. He hasn't delegated that to anybody else. And the Quraysh believed otherwise. Right? So you've got to have a little bit of that framework in mind before we decide whether something has been a spiritual epiphany for us or not. But that's the theoretical discussion. When we come to the practical spirituality, there are certain things I believe that God has not made difficult. And they're very, very easy. One of them is spirituality. The second one is parenting. I know some of you would disagree with that. The third is family life. I have a very simple reason for why I say that. Because this is something everybody is supposed to be able to do. That person who's read 100 books on parenting, and that villager who lives in his village. Yes? The person who's read or heard many lectures on spirituality, and the villager who lives in his village. Right? So spirituality cannot be complicated. Parenting cannot be complicated. The thing I find is that while spirituality is simple, because we don't apply the basics of spirituality, it becomes complicated for us. And we don't apply the basics of parenting, for example, it becomes complicated for us. But otherwise, spirituality itself is not a complicated matter. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
All right, at this time we'll open it up for Q&A. Anyone other, the men or the ladies, have a question? Not all at once, please. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
In your previous 3 deliveries, you did mention what would be the deterrents for spiritual or spirituality or spiritual growth. Could you briefly enlighten what would enhance and promote spirituality, please?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So what would promote and enhance our spirituality? When I'm raising my children, one of the things I find is that half the struggle is to make sure that they are in the right environment. As long as I have them in the right environment, I don't have to deal with many of the struggles that happen outside. For example, if I have them in a Muslim school, then many of the challenges, the ethical issues, the behavior issues that happen in public schools, I don't have to deal with that. I find spirituality is also very, very similar. As long as we stay away from spiritually destructive environments, we stay away from spiritually destructive scenes, spiritually destructive influences, I do believe that's half of the journey. Right? And therefore, spending time in the community, spending time in the masjid, spending time with the family, spending time in nature, avoiding those things which are spiritually destructive is half of the struggle. That's one. The second thing is that the spiritual journey begins by doing that which is wajib and staying away from that which is haram. That's not the entire journey, but no journey can happen without that. And people would come to somebody like Ayatollah Bahjat, and they would say that, well, teach us, what are the secrets to spirituality? And he would say, do what is wajib, and stay away from that which is haram. They would say to him, but more than that, what should we do? And he would say, do that which is wajib, and stay away from that which is haram. It's a very profound point over there. And that the point comes from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ittaqullah yu'allimkumullah. Have taqwa, be God-wary, and God will teach you. We normally ask, well, what is the next step? And how will I know what is the next step in spirituality? Right? And the Quran says, you do what you know, and God will teach you what you don't know. Right? That's what I say, that spirituality is simple, but we don't apply it. We want to see what is the next step, and we haven't fulfilled this step. Right? Sometimes we take it for granted a little bit. For example, if somebody were to ask that, what are the sins of the eye? Would say looking at non-mahram, for example, is a sin of the eye. The path of spirituality, a person has to be very, very careful. One of the great spiritual scholars was Ayatollah Jawad Maliki Tabrizi. And he's got a book, I think either in Liqa'ullah or another book of his, I can't remember which book. He says, on the spiritual path, you should be careful of your eyes. And then he lists 15 sins that can be committed by the eye. For example, looking at your parents with anger, looking at a mu'min with anger, looking at an oppressor, a zalim, with the eyes of love and affection, looking inside a person's house without their permission, looking at their letter or looking at their email, for example, without their permission. So we have to be careful with the eye and the ear and the hands. Taqwa is not that easily acquired. The third thing that enhances spirituality is saying our salat on time. Right? One of the things I strongly believe that is a cornerstone of Islamic spirituality is that we have to give importance to the things that were given importance to by the Ahlul Bayt. A very basic and simple rule. If something was important, the Ahlul Bayt would have taught us. And if they haven't taught us, then it is not important. To me, it never made sense that there would be something so important and the Ahlul Bayt would not tell us about it. And there'd be something that wouldn't be important, but the Ahlul Bayt would give us hadith after hadith after hadith for it. For example, sometimes the path of spirituality, we say, well, what ring should I wear? And what should be written on that ring? And which dhikr should I recite, for example, right? Well, let's look at the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt. What do they focus on? They say salah, al-jama'ah, fil masjid, mathalan, right? Wherever we can try to do that, we try to do that. Somebody even came to Atullah Bahjat and he said that, you're telling me that I should say my salat on time and everything else will work out? He said, yes. He said, but if I say my salat on time, I'm at work. And when I am at work, I cannot focus and concentrate. So which one is better? Saying my salat on time without full concentration? Or saying it later on, but with proper concentration? Which one do you think he said? Sorry? The first one, yeah. He said, saying salat on time. Right? If we understand the definition of spirituality, then we'll understand why this is important. Because when you say your salat on time, there is a profound recognition in the heart. The master has called, ready or not, I must respond. Right? That's what praying salat on time means. So number 3 is saying salat on time. The last thing, and I don't want to give take up too much time there, is at the end of the day, doing something called muhasabah. Muhasabah means to take account. Right? The 7th Imam, Imam Al-Kadhim, alayhi afdalu salati wa salam, he says, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُحَاسِبْ نَفْسَهُ. He's not one of us who does not take an account of himself every evening, every night, before going to sleep. The Imam explains, if during the day you are able to do something good, alhamdulillah, pray for tawfiq to do the same tomorrow. If during the day you did something wrong, astaghfirullah, pray for the strength to avoid it tomorrow. If we take account of where we are, of what we're doing, and every day we've got this spirit of growth, I want to be better than I was yesterday, and inshallah that is something that we have institutionalized within ourselves that brings about spiritual growth. Otherwise, our efforts sometimes are haphazard efforts.
So there's a question from the ladies. If there is, what is the best way of meditating to get closer to God, and where can we find more information?
So the question on meditation is a very interesting question. In my reading, I have not come across meditation as it is practiced today within Islamic texts. I find in Islamic texts, when you look at the Quran and the Hadith, there's a concept called the concept of tafakkur. Tafakkur means reflection. And tafakkur is not complicated. Tafakkur is simple. Tafakkur does not take a lot of time. What I find is that Islam wants us to always be engaging in tafakkur. When you talk about meditation, it makes it sound so complicated. You have to go to a place, isolate yourself from everything, try and focus over there on a particular concept or a particular idea, and you wonder to yourself, as a person, am I able to do that? Am I not able to do that? How often will I be able to do that? One day, Harun wrote a letter to the seventh Imam. He said, "Idhni wa awjiz." Advise me and keep it short. He's telling the Imam how long the advice should be. So the Imam kept it short. He said, okay, in everything you see, do know there is a lesson to take from it. You just have to be ready to take a lesson from it. I'm finding more and more we're not able to engage in reflection. We're very much distracted, right? For example, if you have free time, you're waiting at a bus stop, or you have free time, you're waiting for somebody to come home, and you're sitting on the sofa, what will most of us do? The hand goes in the pocket, looking for a phone, right? We're not comfortable with reflection. Right? Islam says if you really want spiritual growth, the heart and core of spiritual growth comes from reflection. Right? Reflection isn't difficult. But you have to be ready. Any moment can be a moment of reflection. Sometimes you'll be surprised. At work, it will be a moment of reflection. But if you're ready for it, then you'll have it. If you're not ready for it, it will pass and it's gone. I'll give you an example. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of it. We talk about miracles. And I remember one of my teachers, he said that people look for these grand miracles. When is the staff going to turn into a snake? He says that, in fact, in my opinion, every moment is a miracle. Every time a miracle is happening. It's just because we've got so used to them happening over and over again, we don't think of them as miracles. And he gave an example, and he said that the food that you eat, you consume it, the energy changes, it becomes a part of your muscles, it becomes a part of your body, it becomes a part of your hair, it gives you the energy to do things. Isn't that a miracle? I remember once I was walking on the road near my house, and they've got these wild plants. In May or April, they bloom. And the flowers there, they're more fragrant than any flower you can buy from any store. It's just growing wild over there. The colors are beautiful. The smell and the fragrance is amazing. Yeah? And the moment I was just passing by over there, and I looked down, and I saw the earth underneath, and I saw it was dark and putrid and dirty and smelly. And I thought, subhanallah, look at the glory of God. He can take this sand that is so dirty. He can take this sand that is so putrid that you wouldn't want to put in your house, and He can change it into such a beautiful flower. Isn't that a miracle? When you see things like that, they're moments of reflection for us, right? But we have to be ready for them. One day, somebody said to the 6th or the 8th Imam, he said, I've heard a hadith where the Prophet of God says that, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, تَفَكُّرُ سَاعَةٍ خَيْرٌ مِّن قِيَامِ لَيْلَةٍ. Reflecting for a short period of time. I know today when we say the word sa'a for us means an hour. Back then, they didn't have 60 minutes. Yeah? So when it says تَفَكُّرُ سَاعَةٍ, it means reflecting for a short period of time, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe even shorter. Is better than standing up the whole night in prayer. The Imam said, Naam, yes. Qala Rasulullah, the Prophet of God has said this hadith. And this person, he asked a beautiful question. He said, وَكَيْفَ يَتَفَكَّرُ? How is a person supposed to reflect? Do you mean meditation? Do you mean philosophical argument? Do you mean, for example, this type of analytical thinking? Imam says, no. يَمُرُّ بِالدَّارِ وَالْخَرِبَةِ. He passes by a house that is in ruins. يَقُولُ أَيْنَ بَانُوكِ أَيْنَ سَاكِنُوكِ. Now the Imam responded to him with an example. It's not limited to this example. This is just an example. He said if he passes by ruins, he says, where are the people who used to live in you? And where are the people who used to build you? Meaning what? Meaning that such great aspirations, one day we will build it, and one day we will live in it, and our life is going to be set. And where are they today? Where am I going to be tomorrow? The same place where they are, I'm going to be there as well. Now, there's two things over here. The first thing is the Imam says he's talking to the house. But in reality, who's he talking to? He's talking to his heart. In reflection, it's okay to talk to yourself. When you're reflecting, you're actually knocking at the heart. You're saying, wake up. Look at the world around you. Where are you in slumber? Is this the true reality? Do you want your life to be like this? If we're just thinking abstract ideas, oh, I think that's amazing, oh, that's great, okay, that's all right. But reflection in Islam, tafakkur, means to knock. Nabbih, the first Imam says, nabbih bitafakkuri qalbak. Awaken your heart by doing tafakkur. If we're not talking to ourselves, we're not awakening ourselves, then tafakkur is not happening. Secondly, when we do tafakkur, one of the things we want to ask, especially when you're reflecting over life, is you got to ask, what next? What then? Whenever you choose, for example, a goal for yourself, you want to make a decision for yourself, ask yourself, and then what? You'll find it goes a long way. Sometimes we get involved in certain things which are not worthy because we didn't ask, and then what happens? Okay? I don't want to take up too much time here, but I'll share with you a hadith. I think the hadith will be helpful. The importance of tafakkur, and how simple tafakkur is, and how it can happen at every moment. But tafakkur is not like looking at a flower and saying, oh, look at how beautiful the petals are, subhanallah. No, tafakkur is more than that. Yeah? Somebody came to the Holy Prophet, and the Prophet said to him, you've done me a great favor. So now ask me for anything and I'll grant it to you. Can you imagine the Prophet of Allah gives you a blank check and says, ask, whatever you want, I give. And the man was a very smart man. He said, let me think. So he went home. He came back the next day. And he told the Holy Prophet, I'm ready. The Prophet said, what do you want? And he said, what? He said, I want to be with you in Jannah. So one thing you learn is when it comes to the dunya, it's bad to be greedy. When it comes to the akhirah, be as greedy as you can be. I want to be not just in Jannah. And some of us would say, as long as I get in Jannah, it's all good. Alhamdulillah, made it. I want to be with you in Jannah. The Prophet said, not so fast. You first have to explain to me, how did you come to that? Like, who told you that this is a good request to make? And the man said, I thought about it. And look at the thinking. This is tafakkur, okay? You know, Islam says short burst of reflections during the day. Some things that elevate the thought. Think about a higher truth. Ask what next? Is this worthy of a human being? Is it not worthy of a human being, what I'm trying to do here? Yeah? He said, I thought to myself, if I ask the Prophet of Allah for wealth, no matter how much wealth he gives me, at some point it will come to an end. I said, if I ask him for long life, even if he gave me 100 years, at some point it's got to come to an end. He's asking, what next? Like, even if he gave me 100 years, what next? If I asked him for many, 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 many children, no matter how many children the Prophet promised me, yes? At some point, either I have to leave them or they have to leave me. I said, what can I ask for that's always going to be with me? And he said, I thought, let me ask him that I want to be with him in Jannah. You see where tafakkur takes you? You see how it doesn't have to be hard. Yeah? The Prophet of God, it is said in the hadith, put his head down. He was silent for a while. He looked up to him and said, okay, but you have to help me with one thing. And the Prophet of God said to him, help me by lengthening your sujood. Now there's a philosophy behind lengthening the sujood, but I don't want to go into that at this moment.
About the story, like after the boy asked the sheikh or whatever, after he asked him, how did that affect the boy's life? Like, did he change or anything? Or what did he do after?
Or the man who came to the Holy Prophet? Is that the one you're
No,
asking?
the story about the boy going to the temple and stuff. How did that affect the boy's life?
How did it affect the boy's life? I don't know. Like I said, it was a clip that they had made. It was acted out. It wasn't real life. They were just trying to convey a message and trying to inspire people through that message. I think after that clip, he probably went back to his normal life. He was just acting out in that clip, right? Yes, brother.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum,
Wa
Shaykh,
alaikum
and
assalam.
welcome. Thank you for coming. I have two questions, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Is a person's spirituality dependent upon his faith? And number two, what is the significant differences between spirituality and faith? Do you want me to ask it again?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so the question there, let's start with the second one. What is the significant difference between spirituality and faith? And the word faith can have a number of meanings. Sometimes when we use the word faith, we mean religion. And sometimes when we use the word faith, we mean iman. I think the difference between spirituality and religion is obvious, right? Religion teaches us three things. One is a set of beliefs, a set of ethics and morals, and a set of laws. And these beliefs, ethics, and morals are a structured program to help us in developing our spirituality. And we define spirituality on the first and the second night. Okay? But sometimes we define faith as iman. And iman is a level of spirituality. And it's a lower level of spirituality. It's important, but it's not the highest level of spirituality. Right? You find in Islam, it breaks it down, in some of our ahadith, that break it down into 4 levels. The first level is Islam. The second level is Iman. The third level is Taqwa. And the fourth level is Yaqeen. Yaqeen. Islam is when a person just professes faith on his tongue. He says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and I bear witness that the Holy Prophet is the Prophet of God. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَقَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. The Bedouins say that we have faith, we have iman. قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا. Tell them, you still don't have iman. وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا. But say that we have Islam. We have surrendered, we have submitted, we follow this religion. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. And faith has not yet entered your heart. Okay? So Islam is the profession of the tongue. Iman is what is in the heart. Okay? وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ لَا يَلِتْكُم مِّنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ شَيْئًا. But if you are to obey God and the Prophet of God, your deeds will not go to waste. Meaning what? Meaning that slowly you will start developing iman in your heart. The second level is iman. When a person starts to believe in what is in the unseen, right? And even though he hasn't seen it, he believes in it. Okay? And one thing I should point out over here, when normally we talk about iman and faith, if we haven't been exposed to Islamic thought and philosophy, we may think of faith as something that is blind faith. Islam does not allow for blind faith in matters of theology. Right? I know in certain, for example, religions, they say, well, we can't reason it, so just have what? Faith in it. Right? For example, in Christianity, there are many things that cannot be rationalized, so you're told just have faith in it. Yeah, it's a question of faith. It's a matter of faith. For example, if you ask children today, what's the difference between religion and science? They'll say, science is based in facts and religion is based in faith. As if religion is not based in facts. Yeah? That comes from the Christian thought, from Christian theology. In Islam we say no. You first have got to understand, and then you can have faith in something you have understood. Right? I don't want to go too deep into that. That's Iman. When a person has Iman, then slowly he starts developing taqwa. Right? Taqwa means that he knows that God is watching him. And so now his actions are in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And then if a person continues with taqwa, then he develops yaqeen. And yaqeen means that now he's able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He's able to experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Now these are all levels of spirituality. Right? And if you're asking about the relationship between spirituality and faith, well, if we define faith as Iman, it is the second level, according to this hadith, the second level of the spiritual path. But the last level of the spiritual path is yaqeen, is certainty, right? The way the Prophet of God says to Abu Dhar, he says, Abu Dhar, worship God as if you can see him. That's yaqeen, certainty. But if you can't see him, then know that he sees you. That is taqwa. You know that God is watching over you. Okay? Now, does a person's spirituality depend upon his faith? I assume here you mean depend upon his religion. Yes? Brother Dawood? Or depend upon his Iman? Both, okay. Well, obviously, as I said, Iman is a level of spirituality. The more you increase in your Iman, the more spirituality you have. Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, all those who believe, aminu, have faith. Meaning what? Increase in your faith, right? Or for example, Allah says in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةَ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. God is the one who reveals, descends peace and tranquility over the hearts of the believer. For what purpose? لِيَزْدَادُوا إِيمَانًا مَعَ إِيمَانِهِمْ. So that they may increase to the faith that they have, more faith to it, right? So the spiritual journey is about increasing faith and having more and more certainty in what you have come to know, right? But if you're asking, is a person's spirituality dependent upon his religion? Oh yes, it certainly is, right? As I said, spirituality is about seeing the truth. And the truth is the truth of Islam. And Islam has the truth in its entirety. And a person who follows Islam has a greater access to spirituality than anybody else would have access to spirituality. Right? The question is, what if people follow other divine religions? Do they also have access to spirituality? Well, in accordance to the truth that they have understood, or what is true, they can have some level, I suppose, of spirituality, but not the way it is found in Islam.
All right, so there's a question here from the ladies. Do you think the general perception of spirituality is often an obstacle in spirituality itself? For example, how very few people in the community attended the Jama'ah today, but all attended, or majority of the community attended the Majlis, while nothing can really replace Jama'ah.
Yeah. I think that our communities can improve their understanding of spirituality, right? And that's what we're trying to do through the lectures and the conversations that we have. Clearly, our understanding of spirituality is not just influenced by the Quran. Sometimes it has been influenced by culture. Sometimes it has been influenced by popular culture, right? And that's what we've been talking about over the last 2 to 3 nights, where we see that our current understanding of spirituality has changed significantly. And that can be an obstacle, right? Because sometimes a person may come for a jama'ah and he may not feel very spiritual. I remember asking one of my teachers, I said, you say that we should go to the masjid for jama'ah, but what if we don't feel very spiritual in the jama'ah? And I feel more spiritual at home because there's less of a distraction. And he said, no, go to the masjid for jama'ah. In time, you get used to it. In time, it becomes okay for you, right? So sometimes, for example, we may come to the masjid for jama'ah, and we don't get that spiritual euphoria. We don't get the spiritual inspiration. Sometimes we come to the majlis. It's an inspirational majlis. We become inspired. We say, the majlis is more fulfilling than the jama'ah, coming to the mosque for prayer. One of the things we have to recognize in Islam is that the path of spirituality always requires two things. One without the other is not going to work. The first path that we have to tread is the path of knowledge. That's called ilm. Right? We acquire that knowledge by understanding the Quran, by listening to lectures, by talking to scholars, by reading books. We should never undermine that. So when you come for the majlis, that is part of our spiritual growth. It's a necessary part of our spiritual growth. We were in Qum. On a weekly basis, we would feel a need to listen to a lecture on ethics and morality. And even in a place like Qum, where you are surrounded by people who are very spiritual and spiritual places, and for us who are studying in the Hawza, you're always around scholars, we felt a need to listen to lectures on a weekly basis that gave us a spiritual boost. So I wonder, what about living in this part of the world? Do we not need a spiritual boost on a weekly basis? The majlis is very important. Okay? Secondly, we not only tread the path of ilm, we also have to tread the path of amal, of action. The first action is, of course, salat, saying our prayers, right? And prayers, jama'ah is better. The masjid is even better as well, right? So I think rather than sort of putting people into a dichotomy and saying, well, which one, jama'ah or majlis? I think let's recognize, alhamdulillah, people come to the majlis. Now let us also get them to come to the jama'ah as well, right? And I think that if we think along those lines, it's more constructive in the community than saying, well, you know, people have a problem right now, right? Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
In one of the lectures you gave, you alluded to the idea of viewing Karbala from more than just the lengths of an emotional appeal. Can you expand a bit more on that, please?
Correct. Yeah. So when we look at Karbala, I think it's very important, first and foremost, to understand the messages of Imam al-Hussein, the reason for why he was in Karbala, right? And to understand the ethics of Imam al-Hussein. And that when we cry because those messages were trampled upon. Those messages were not upheld. There's something very wrong within the conscience and the understanding of the ummah at that time. Right? For example, injustice had become prevalent, and nobody was willing to stand up against injustice. Right? For example, nobody was willing to support the cause of truth at that time. Right? For example, people had become very worldly at that time. When you look at those people who trampled over the horse of Imam al-Hussein, yeah? The reason they trampled over the horse of Imam al-Hussein was because they wanted to be able to go to Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad and say, we trampled over the body of Imam al-Hussein because we wanted a gift from you. Right? We have to understand what was wrong at that time and what was Imam al-Hussein trying to fight against. Now, there's a very interesting narration that I don't know why sometimes we don't mention in our spoken narration of the tragedy of Karbala. is that if you open up, for example, Nafasul Mahmum, or even the Maqtal, I believe, of Abu Mikhnaf, he says, on the night of Sham-e Ghariba, Fatima, the daughter of Imam al-Hussein, he says Fatima, the name that's mentioned there is Fatima, was running away from the tents, and there was chaos over there. Okay? And one of the enemies came to her, Yarhamukumullah, and he was trying to steal her earrings and pull it hard. And as he was doing that, he was crying. So Fatima, the daughter of Al-Hussein, turns towards him and says, Ma yubkika? Like, why are you crying? And the enemy says, how can I not cry when I'm stealing from the children of Rasulullah? So she asks him, then leave it and don't steal. And listen to the answer. These are the messages that we have to be able to take away, how a human being should be, how a human being should not be, right? He says to her, but if I don't steal it from you, then somebody else will steal it from you. I can't let that go. If you think about it, many a times we live our lives like that as well. If I don't do it, somebody else will do it. If I don't get it, somebody else will get it, right? We're living our life in competition, the way they lived in competition. But the other thing you also see, and you find that when you read the Quran, and there are stories in the Quran, you must wonder, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hardly tells a story in a chronological manner. The only story that we have in a chronological manner in the Quran is the story of Prophet Yusuf. Otherwise, it's very interesting if you actually were to read the Quran with some understanding, from, let's say, surah number 1 to surah number 15. There's so many surahs in between where in each surah, there's a story of 5 prophets. And then you go to the next surah, and the story of maybe sometimes the same 5 prophets, but from a different perspective. It's like God picks and chooses a segment, and then he moves on to the next prophet. Have you ever wondered why? Like, why does God do it that way? This is very important. Atla Hadi Ma'rifat, he explains it in his book. He says, because God is telling you, there is always going to be universal realities in play. Yes? Something called the sunnah, the practice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, وَجَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ. Truth will always be victorious, falsehood will always go away, right? أَمَّا الزَّبَدُ فَيَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً وَأَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسُ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Foam is going to go away. That which benefits people, that will always remain on the earth. This is a universal reality, not going to change. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. It's a universal reality. Now, God says, look at the story of Ibrahim. Do you see it there? You do? Okay. Let's take you to the story of Musa. Do you see it there? You do. Oh, let's take you to the story of Nuh. Do you see it there? You do. So when you come across an example in your life, you can be sure that the same universal principles that were applied over there are the same universal principles that will apply in your life. And that's why the stories of the Quran are always true stories. Because if it's a fantasy, no matter how great the ending is, your heart will always tell you, great, but it's a fantasy. When they're true stories, one after the other, your heart tells you, yes, God will always fulfill his promises. God will always help the believers. The believers will never be forgotten. For example, you look at the story of Prophet Yusuf. He says with so much certainty to Zulaykha, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمِينَ. A zalim, an oppressor, is never, ever going to be successful. It doesn't matter what happens. These are universal truths. You look at all these things I mentioned, this is what we see in Karbala. Right? Why did they stand over there so firm? Because they knew that the one who stands on the truth, his message is always going. This is a universal reality. God will always fulfill his promise upon us. Right? Those are the universal truths that we've got to be able to see when we're listening to the tragedy of Karbala. Right? Whether it's about human ethics, or it is about the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reason I focus on that is because sometimes, unfortunately, what I find is that we take cultural concepts, we insert them into the rendition of the tragedy, and then we cry over that. Right? And I've got some examples in mind, but I don't think I want to mention this evening. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Do you have anything from the sisters?
Let's take one question from the sisters and then go back to the brothers. No, none right now, okay.
Question is spirituality an individual journey or is it a communal journey? Meaning, am I supposed to go at it alone or should I go at it with people?
Well, it is both an individual journey and a communal journey as well, right? It's an individual journey in the sense that on the day of judgment, God is not going to ask you about the actions of others, nor is He going to ask them about your actions. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةُ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Right? No soul shall bear the burden of another soul. Okay? For example, sometimes people may feel if everybody else is doing it, then it should be okay if I do it as well. Or if the leaders are telling me to do it, like this was the main thing in the Quran, right? And Allah was actually speaking to the people there and saying, on the day of judgment, your leaders are not going to be able to protect you. You think for yourself, they think for themselves. You have to make your decisions, they have to make their decisions, right? And they won't be able to help you. It's there in Surah Hijr, I believe, or Ra'd, one of the two. Okay. So that's there. So it has to be an individual journey where even if the community is not coming along at that level, you're not excused from it. You have to make your journey, right? If a person makes that journey, the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's an ummah by himself. Kana Ibrahim ummatan. Ibrahim was an ummah into himself, right? Because he made that spiritual journey. One day, a companion of the sixth Imam came to him and said that some of our companions, they tell me that I go to the lands of the non-Muslims. If I die over there, then I'm going to be raised on the day of judgment with them, not as a Muslim. Right? And there was this kind of understanding there. The Imam asked him, so when you go there, do you propagate the faith? Do you speak about the faith? Do you share the haqq with them? And he said, yes, I do. The Imam said to him that on the day of judgment, you will be raised as an ummah or a congregation by yourself, and your light will be in front of you. So every human being has his own journey. Right? At the same time, though, a human being cannot separate himself from his community. He has to be a part of the community. In Islam, one of the attributes of a Muslim is he is part of the jama'ah, part of the community. Right? For example, the Prophet of Allah says, "Alzimul jama'ah." You stay with the jama'ah. وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالْفُرْقَ. And beware of separating yourself from the jama'ah. The jama'ah means community here. Okay? Jam, the collection of people. The first Imam, he says in Nahj al-Balagha, that surely shaitan attacks one of you when you separate from the community the way a wolf attacks a sheep that is separated from the flock. One, we have to be part of the community. Number two, we have a duty. A person can't say, you know what, I mind my own business, you mind your own business. Day of judgment, God asks me, and He asks you, and we have nothing to do with each other. No. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Okay, God, I have iman, and I do amal salih. I have nothing to do with anybody else. God says, no. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. and they advise and admonish each other to be strong to the truth. And they admonish each other to be committed to patience and perseverance as well. Right? So, on one hand, we are answerable for our own journey, regardless of whether others come with us or they don't come with us. On the other hand, we do have a duty to be part of the community. And the Quran tells us on the day of judgment, there are 3 books. 3 books will be opened. The first book will be your own book. The second book will be the book of your community. You're answerable. And the third one, if I'm not mistaken, will be that of the society or the ummah of the Prophet or something to that effect. Right? And there are verses of the Quran to that effect. So yes, we have an individual duty to God, but we also have to be part of that communal duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we cannot separate ourselves from that.
I guess I'll ask a question. In your lecture today, you talked about the veils of the heart, and you mentioned certain things like sins, like jealousy, anger, other sort of impurities that block the heart from spirituality. It seems like you could argue that there are a few ways to improve spirituality. You've got dhikr, you've got your prayers, and your deeds. It seems that there are like more ways for your spirituality to be blocked as opposed to actually travel the realm of spirituality. Could you reconcile that?
So one of the principles that we have in the Quran is that وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Surely those who struggle and put effort into our part, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ. So if you want to translate that, it goes, we shall certainly, verily, surely guide them to our path. No matter what the challenges are, I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that the one who will help us to overcome those challenges is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and nothing is difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the Rabb. He is the Wali, as long as we accept Him as the Wali. Right? These concepts, I know sometimes they seem like abstract or new concepts. They're there in things we recite every day. And if only we paid attention to what we were reciting every day, you'll say, where does this idea come that God is the Wali? Yeah? Well, it comes in Ayatul Kursi. Allahu waliyul ladina amanu yukhrijuhum mina dhulumati ila nur. God is the Wali, the guardian, the trainer, the teacher of those who believe. He takes them out from darknesses and brings them into light. Right? No matter what the obstacles and the challenges are, the one who's helping you is above these obstacles and these challenges. Okay? The spiritual part, because you have the help of God, cannot be difficult. Right? Number 2, there may be obstacles, but there is so much guidance that God has given. The intellect is a form of guidance. Human conscience is a form of guidance. Prophets are a form of guidance. The lessons which are there around you in nature and society, they are a form of guidance. Right? It's very interesting. One day, I think it was Hassan al-Basri, if I'm not mistaken, the same one we spoke about. And he was passing by, and the 4th Imam heard him saying that, I am surprised at the one who finds salvation. How did he find salvation? Because there's so many obstacles, like you say, along the path. Right? You just go outside and there's so many challenges. And then within you there are so many challenges. He says, I'm surprised. But I'm not surprised the one who went into hell, how he ended up in the fire of hell. Imam Sajjad says, I completely disagree with you. He says, I'm surprised. I'm not surprised at the one who went to heaven. How did he end up in heaven? The Imam says, I am surprised the one who went to hell. How did he end up in hell? مَعَ سَعَةِ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ, despite the mercy of God being so vast and expansive. Mercy of God being expansive means what? Now, sometimes when we think of mercy, we think of forgiveness. Mercy is far greater than that. Now, that's where some of our thinking has got to change. And we always pray to God, God, even if I'm not deserving to go into paradise, forgive me and let me enter paradise. Correct? That's your mercy. That's got to change. Not be able to pray to God, God, no, make me deserving to enter paradise because your mercy is that great. Guide me. Show me the path. If God's mercy is so great, well, He's given us prophets, He's given us imams, He's given us our intellect, He's given us our conscience, He's given us our fitrah. A lot of guidances along the way. The third point I'd like to make is the point that I made at the beginning, to say that sometimes half of the battle is just making sure you're not in the wrong place. Right? You're in the right place. You come to the masjid, you turn off the TV or the screen, you turn off wrong influences. And sometimes we don't see things the way we ought to see them. I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of spirituality, but also from the perspective of parenting as well. When your children are watching something on the screen, and you say, well, we've got to censor it, I ask you, what do we censor? We censor the appropriate or inappropriate behavior, correct? So censoring means if they're using inappropriate language, then you mute it. If there are inappropriate images, then you do what? You turn it off. If there's inappropriate singing or dancing happening over there, then you change the channel, right? Well, that's the behavior that's inappropriate. My question is, what about the ideas which are inappropriate? How do you censor that? You mean like what ideas? I mean like materialism, consumerism, hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure, right? Like individualism. Where do we learn all of these things? We learn them from the movies that we see. We learn them from the TV shows that we see. Our children learn them from those things that they see. How do you censor that? And somebody was telling me that we've got to be able to censor it. I said, how are you going to censor this? The only censor that I know is what? Is a nice hammer. Seriously. Now, I want to go on the spiritual path. It's very interesting, the hadith of the Holy Prophet. He says, الْمَرْءُ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلِهِ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْ. A man lives by the religion of his friends. Then see whom you take to be your friend. And don't just keep the bar over here and say, but he doesn't swear. But he doesn't, for example, look at inappropriate things. Now ask yourself, is this person an individualistic person or not? Materialistic or not? This show, for example, does it strengthen my ability to see God, or does it weaken my ability to see God? Right? So I think the third thing that can help us in our spiritual journey is actually not working hard, but working smart. If we remove ourselves from the negative influences out there, by negative influences, I don't just mean behavior influences, I mean ideological influences being more important, then you find that the spiritual journey becomes a whole lot easier, inshallah.
I think we'll end the session now. It's close to 10:30. I'd like to thank Sheikh Bachoo for taking the time out of his schedule, and everyone else for participating in the Q&A. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.